right, Brent Porcio, TopVelocity.net, going to do this last video on the front leg pitching mechanics. So we looked at the video on the front leg pitching science, all the science that shows the ground force of the front leg is a high correlation to ball velocity. The front leg seems to be more easily or more coached than the drive leg right now. Also too, because it can be a little bit simpler, but it also cannot be a little bit simpler. It can be simpler in the fact that you just got to stop your momentum and try to push into your momentum. But there's a lot of things that are going on that allow this leg really to extend, and we'll talk about that. So, if you haven't seen the videos on the pitching or drive leg pitching mechanics, watch that. But coming out of leg lift, as we're leading through the back hip and we're going to front foot strike, it's very important that this leg be passive, meaning it can't be really active because it disrupts the work of the back leg. It'll pull momentum, it'll pull weight off the back leg and not allow the back leg to really propel or power off the rubber. It'll be more pulled off the rubber. So we want to be more passive here. That's why staying maybe internally rotated can help that. But when we get to front foot strike, okay, first of all, landing positions. If we took our foot on the rubber and we draw a line right between the middle of our foot to our target, we're going to land 7 inches inside that, about 20 degrees closed, because as we drive our foot into landing, we're going to be around toe to heel or slightly closed. We want that position because the femur needs to be slightly across the hips because the hips connect, or the femur connects on the outside of the hips. So when it goes slightly across and the hips rotate, it creates a pivot point right in the middle of the pelvis, which creates stability. So it locks down directly towards the target. If I was more closed, I wouldn't get my hips all the way through. Now I'd be pulling across my body. And if I was too open, my hips would have a lot of play once they open because they're not fully open. Fully open would take me off towards the dugout. So it's critical that we land in that 7 inches inside the drive line, 20 degrees closed. And that puts us in that perfect position to where the hips lock down and stabilize, they're open. From there, of course, we have to stop our momentum. So there has to be some pre-activation of the leg, the quad, knowing that it's about to land. So you actually don't have the instincts or really the reaction time to fire that quad in a split second when 250% of your body weight, which studies show up to 250% of your body weight is hitting there. So there's some pre-activation. That quad, that calf are kicking on, so when you land, it creates stability. That's why you have to be careful being really aggressive with that leg or throwing that leg, because you can disrupt the pre-activation, which allows it to really stabilize. That's why when you see guys with the big kicks, they come down and they have a hard time stabilizing quick enough. You want stability immediately. Studies show any lead knee flexion is typically of low velocity pitchers. So pre-activation, you hit front foot strike. Now, what really supports the extension, the leg driving and extension? Several things. If your trunk is not being pulled in rotation and it wants to transfer forward, that will kind of pop the hips up in abduction and help that leg extend. So that's a reaction to it. Also, too, if I'm landing and I do have the hips driving, that's why we have to get extended into front foot strike, because that's going to push the back hip around. And when the back hip comes around, the front hip goes back, and just the act of the front hip going back creates stability. That's why rotators can still get very stable, because of the rotational aspects of the pelvis helping the front leg extend. But we'd rather see it in a forward movement with hip abduction and then some rotation into extension than just purely into rotation, right? So you've got to make sure the pelvis is rotating, the glove side's not pulling, so the trunk is moving forward, the hip's abducting. And then at the end of the day, at that point, it's just power. Do I have enough power to stop 250% of my body weight, which studies show up to 250% of my body weight, and then extend back into it in 0.1 or 0.2 seconds, 0.2 of a second, because studies show when you hit front foot strike, you have 0.2 of a second to release the pitch, was less than the blink of an eye. So it really shows the power, the leg power of a power pitcher, high velocity pitcher, is truly, truly the foundation of how this works. Because there's not many athletes that can stop 250% of their body weight on one leg and push back into that force in a linear direction, not in a vertical direction, in less or around 0.2 of a second. That is an elite move. So let's go over that. You need some hip rotation coming through the back leg drive. You need some good forward transfer of the trunk, not pulling off to help abduct the hips. You need the pre-activation to stabilize the leg, and you need the power production to extend it back into your momentum in 0.2 of a second. If you're going too vertical, then you didn't load your back leg well. And you need to go back and learn how to load your back leg well to keep you behind your front leg, to then, if you had enough momentum, to carry you out over your front leg. And that's how you get over your front side. It's not just you trying to consciously reach out like a lot of the conventional wisdom makes you think. It's how you load and power down the mound, and how you stabilize your front leg and allow that energy to transfer is really how you master the front leg pitching mechanics.